There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello BookTube, I'm Sean the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel. Here I am with Friday Reads. And this is going to be a hodgepodge of kind of a vlog because I don't have a lot to say. I'm just going to take you with me on my reading day and report back, but I haven't finished any books. And I've started one book which I'll talk about a little later. But mainly just a little update as I read throughout the day. So, stay tuned. This is the firefighter school near my house. I've never been this close to it. And the new batch of recruits are just starting training now. You see all the fire hats and fire uniforms. And you're gonna hear the chant. That is fascinating and more than a little erotic. You know what happened? How do you say fire in Japanese? The video won't be very good because it's through a wire fence, but it took me so long to place that chanting sound. They haven't given you a good chant yet, but I can hear it all the way into my I hear the chants all the way about 7 or 8 blocks into my apartment when the doors open, and it just goes all the way through my body. But I've never actually been over this close. I've been trying to find out how to apply for a job as locker room cleaner. I do it for free. So yeah, firefighter school near my house. Alright, it's going to be noisy, but I find that firefighter chants really quite lovely, so I'll ask you to put up with it for a couple of minutes while I film in this location. They're just right over there. I've never been so close to them, but as I said, they're chanting thrums for blocks right into my body when I have my door open in the spring or the summer, so it's a very special sound. I remember Steve Donahue asking what it was when I did a video in a park just over there, and it's really close up. So I won't go on too long on this location, but it's noisy with traffic and whatever. But I did a test, and I think you can hear me. So just continuing with my Friday reads. I'm still reading The Stolen Bicycle, which was long listed for the Man Booker International Prize. Didn't make the short list, by Wu Ming Yi. And it's been kind of like this, but I've never once considered bailing. So I am going to finish it, and it's starting to really grab me. It's a really meandering, loose, baggy monster of a novel, and I'm not going to say a whole lot about it because I'm going to do a full review. But it's about stolen bicycles, and there's a genealogy of bicycles. The protagonist, and it's easy for dozens and dozens of pages to forget who the protagonist is, because there's so many nested stories, and the nesting is complex and loose. But the narrator's father disappeared on a bicycle. I think he was going to the store. I forget where he was going, but when the protagonist was a young boy, his father just walked out of their lives or disappeared. And on his bicycle, the brand name was Lucky Bicycle. And so the narrator becomes obsessed with that type of bicycle especially, but also the history of bicycles in Japan, which is deeply interwoven with the colonial Japanese occupation. And it does get a little bit dry at times, but as long as you can sort of go through those, it's really quite a puzzle. And now it's gotten into one of the women that's helping him find out what happened to his father's bicycle, because it does seem to have turned up. I'm still not clear if it is his father's bicycle, but he seems to think it is. And he's corresponding, he's having this mysterious email correspondence with a Taiwanese young woman he's never met, and she's telling him stories about a butterfly collage factory. And though that writing is just gorgeous, and really, I didn't know anything about the art of making collages using parts of butterfly wings. And now the guy who's the ex-boyfriend of this woman, this mysterious woman, is telling him about his family. His name is Abbas. I think it must be a nickname, but Abbas's father is from I forgot to look up the pronunciation. I'm gonna guess it's an Aboriginal Taiwanese tribe called Tsu, T-S-O-U, and there's some audio tapes that his father made in the language of Tsu, intermingled with Japanese, because he grew up during the occupation, and those were the only two languages that he spoke, and so they're having it translated. And this part of the novel reminds me quite a bit of just maybe the mysterious elements. It's evoking White Tears by Harry Kunter quite a bit. So I just want to read this little paragraph that shows you kind of the mystery and the process of trying to solve the mystery. It's just really a nice piece of writing, and also gives you a sense of what's happening. I'd go to the village hotspot every evening, the spot with the best reception, to see what Ning had sent me. Then I'd return to Abbas's old room and listen to the tapes over and over again, while checking Ning's translation against what the old Sioux fellow had told me, trying to piece together this story that mixed Sioux and Japanese together, to find its shape, its turning points. I felt like a woodworker fitting mortise and tenon together, like I was rebuilding one of the old police station cum post offices the Japanese had built in the mountains during the colonial period. Yeah, it's fascinating. It's not always fascinating, but parts of it are deeply fascinating, and more to say in my review, but it's going fairly well. Hey again, well, I'm back home now. It's Friday evening, Tokyo time, on my first glass of wine, and I'm going to finish up my Friday reads. This has been about Hodge Podge. I had some vlogging outside, and I barely talked about one book that's in progress, and I'm going to talk about another one now, and then I'm going to finish up by talking about the one book of poetry that I've started. Don't have much to say about that, and one book that I'm looking forward to starting next week, even though I won't have finished any books by then probably. This 1945 British novel by Denton Welch, In Youth is Pleasure, is just fascinating. I'm about maybe halfway through, and I have so much to say about it, but I just want to read you a passage that I just read last night that it was like, whoa! So Orville, his name is Orville, unfortunately, he's 15 years old, and he's on this little holiday with his dad and his two brothers, but he avoids them, and they don't seem to care. Maybe they don't want to spend time with him during the day either, so he goes off on his own most of the time during the day, and he doesn't really get into trouble, but he's kind of a strange kid, and he has all kinds of bizarre adventures that, to me, are perfect to show what being a 15-year-old is like, whether it's 1945 or 2017 perhaps. But in this one, he breaks into a small church that he stumbles upon in the woods or somewhere, and this is what happens. So here he is in the church, alone. Orville went quickly to the middle aisle and did a deep genuflection, at the same time crossing himself extravagantly from arm to arm and head to navel. He had learnt these gestures from watching people in French and Belgian cathedrals, and performing the action himself gave him pleasure and excitement. But he only genuflected and crossed himself when quite alone, never when there was another person present. He stood up and looked about him. The church had been drastically restored. Nothing except the old walls seemed to remain. The rest of the main structure was now entirely Victorian. The hard, sharply molded windows were filled with bright glass. The font was of Aberdeen granite, and the quite recent pulpit was in carefully insipid Gimson style. The only charming things remaining were the 18th century memorial plaques on the walls, a few earlier tombs, and one late Gothic brass, hidden under the coconut matting. Orville, who always lifted all the mats in churches, soon found this. He stood looking down at the lady in her fantastic horned headdress. Kneeling on the stone, he tried to read her name and the date, but the black letter and the Latin defeated him, except for Hic Jacet. Suddenly, without knowing why, he lay down at full length on the cold slab and put his lips to the brass lady's face. He kissed her juicily. When he lifted his head, the smell and the taste of the brass still hung about his nose and mouth. He looked down from a few inches away and saw the wet imprint of his lips planted in the dulled, frosted area his breath had made. "You haven't been kissed for 500 years, I bet," he droned in a low, chanting voice. He laid his cheek against the brass and tried to think through the stone, through the coffin, to the skeleton. He was the woman now, lying in the grave, crying out for lovers, and watching from below his own antics on the tombstone. I think that's just stunning, and tried to think through the stone, through the coffin, to the skeleton. Yeah. This is bizarre and extraordinary. I am really, really enjoying it. The other day, I just got a really naughty tweet from Steve Donahue. Don't interrupt me. I was only vaguely aware of Tracy K. Smith, but she's the poet laureate of the US of A, obviously appointed by the previous president, not the current one, African-American poet, and she had a new book of poetry come out this week. It's called Wade in the Water by Tracy K. Smith. And for some reason, I think I saw something on Twitter about it, and I just kind of casually checked, because I like to read about a book of poems a month, and I checked on Scribd, and it was available the day of publication in audio. So I started listening to it, and I'm loving it. I'm just 20% of the way in, and I see, actually, now that I've read a couple reviews, that most of the poems are about slaves, but I don't think the ones I've heard so far are, but maybe I should listen to them again now that I know that. But I thought most of them were quite stunning, and they're read by the poet Smith, so really enjoying it. Don't know how to talk about poetry. That will probably never change. It's going really well. And to finish up, I'm looking forward to sometime next week starting another Three Amigos buddy read. This one is with Leah of Hide and Seek and Kendra Winchester. And we are going to be doing another vlog collaboration buddy read, a Maggie O'Farrell novel, This Must Be the Place. I'm really looking forward to that. I have only read one novel by O'Farrell, The Vanishing Act of Esme Lennox, which I loved, and I much more recently listened to the audiobook of her memoir, I Am, I Am, I Am. So I'm quite stoked to begin this. Stay tuned for some more vlogging coming down the pipes. So this was a loose, baggy Friday Reads. And what are you up to, reading-wise or otherwise, this weekend? Have a nice one, whatever you're doing and whatever you're reading. Thanks for watching.